Hello, this is an introduction to Module 15, which is about two-way tables or contingency tables. We are shifting here to talking about categorical data, and we're going to use this data here that's about the Titanic. You've probably seen the movie, or even if you haven't seen the movie, you know about the big ship that sank and a lot of folks died, unfortunately. So this information has about the gender of the people on board and what class they were in. That's first class passenger, second class passenger, third class passenger, and crew. And then also how old they were, that'd be adult or child, and whether they survived or not. So to start off, I'm going to make a plot. And what you're going to notice right away is that there's a lot of dots. That's because, as you can see, there's just over 2,200 people in this on the Titanic when it sank. And we're going to make it a little bigger so we can see it more easily. And then we're going to put age at the bottom here, so adult and children. And you're going to see right away that there's a lot more adults than there are children. I'm going to stack it so it looks nicer. And then I'm going to just get some numbers in here. And actually, before I do that, just to make this a little easier to see, I'm going to make the dots smaller so we can see the numbers better. So here we go. Oh, I'm going to make the dots a little smaller. There they go. So you can see now that there were 2,092 adults on board and 109 children. Now what we want to do is we want to say, well, let's talk about how many of each type of person, either adult or children, how many of them survived. So I'm going to put that in here. And here is that two-way table, or contingency table as sometimes it's called. So notice first of all that the children are still here. This is still 109 children. If we go back to where we were, there's 109 children. And when I put survived back in there, it's 57 of them survived and 52 of them didn't survive. But together you still get that 109. It's the same for the adults. If we add this together, we're going to get that 2,092, and we see that 1,438 of them didn't survive and 654 of them did survive. This is why we call this a two-way table, because we read it both up and down, and in this case up and down tells us about whether you're an adult or a child, and you also read it side to side, which is in this case to know whether they survived or they didn't survive. So again, just to review here, when I look at this 52, it's telling me that this is there are 52 children who didn't survive, and there are 57 children who did survive. An interesting question right now is, you could say, well, how many total passengers did survive? And you can see that that would be the 654 survived and the 57 survived. So together that makes 711 who did survive. And of course, if we add those two together, we're going to get 1,490, 1438 plus 52 to find how many didn't survive. Now, let's move on and ask a question like, if you are children or adults more likely to survive? Well, to do that, you might immediately say, well, look, there's 654 adults survived and 57 children survived. So obviously, way more adults survived than children. So adults must be more likely to survive. The problem with that way of looking at it is that we're not really taking into account that there were a lot more adults on the boat than there were children. So to take care of that problem, we're going to pretend that each of them had only 100 on the boat, 100 adults and 100 children. And that means we're going to do percents. So let's put percents in there. All right. Now, right away, we see a 92% there and a 8% there, 3% there, 97% there. And again, it looks like 92% is a lot bigger here than the 8% here. So adults must be more likely to survive. But again, we're not reading this very carefully, because this is not 92% of the adults survived. That doesn't even make sense, because this, remember, is, get rid of the percents for a second so you can see the number better. This is 654 out of a total of 2092, and 654 out of 2092 is not 92%. So what is this 92%? Well, it turns out that that 92% is 654 out of this total right here. And that makes sense. You can see way more dots here than here. And so this is 92% of the top row. This is 97% of the bottom row. So that does make sense, but then let's try to say it in English. What we would say is something like 92% of the passengers that survived were adults, and only 8% of the passengers that survived were children. So does that mean, again, that adults are much more likely to survive than children? Well, no. It means that of those that survived, more of them were adults, but that's to be expected because there were way more adults on the boat. So there's another way to look at this, which is to change this. See how right here I just clicked on that, and it's, instead of showing row percentages, which is what we have now, we're going to show column percentages. This is what we really want, because now we're seeing that 31%, or now the percentages go this way, 31% of the adults survived compared to 52% of the children survived. So that means that actually children are more likely to survive than adults. So it's important for you to recognize how to read these, number one, then also to use percentages, because otherwise you're not being able to compare accurately, and then to make sure that the right percentages are here. If you use the row, you could ask, of the people that survived, who had a greater percentage? Well, yes, of course, it was adults had a greater percentage of the people who survived. But when you look at it as who is the more likely to survive, it's children are much more likely to survive than adults. And that kind of makes sense. They probably were putting the children in the boats to be rescued first. Anyway, I hope that's a helpful initial demonstration of Module 15. And I look forward to seeing you online with more questions. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.